brief, but I thought it was maybe worthwhile. Someone's really got a lot of. Yeah, sure. Okay. Wave at me if you want to say something. Okay. I thought it'd be useful just to quickly look at some of the functions in TrainingPeaks, even though I think you've all probably figured them out by now. Um, but there'll be some things on the back end that I'd like to show you in terms of what I'm seeing and working with in terms of your data and some of the details we can look into in each individual workout, some of the weekly summary information, and then we'll take a quick look at your dashboard and see what all of the data goes into in the end, if that's helpful. And then just wave at me or interrupt me as we go, and I'll stop at any point. Martin, do you mind if I share your calendar? I see that it's up here, so you might be a good person to start with. But as all of you have seen already, because we've been working together at least for a few weeks, the most basic utility of TrainingPeaks is just this calendar function. I think that's pretty obvious for everyone since we've been doing it. The one thing I'll mention for a couple of people who've just started is the color coding on the workouts. I don't know if you've noticed that, but TrainingPeaks gives you a green, yellow, or orange or red box, depending on how close you were to the intended total workout duration. So here's, for example, Martin with a lot of green boxes and a yellow box in this case. He got a yellow box here because the planned workout duration was 1 hour 15, and it looks like he did a 51-minute run instead. So the yellow box just gives me a quick alert that maybe someone is going over or under the programming, and I might want to look into what's happening. In this case, you can see the answer is that Martin split his run into two pieces for some interesting reason. So TrainingPeaks thought he didn't quite run long enough on that day. If you skip something altogether or go way over or under, you'll get a red box, but generally these will be green boxes as you go. This brings up one functionality you may not have noticed, which is you can go in 2 workouts after they're completed and adjust the planned duration if you like, just so you get green boxes if you deserve them. So in Martin's case, we could double click on this recovery to easy workout, and since he split it in 2, we could call this a 55-minute workout, save and close, and now he's got a green box on that day. And similarly, you'll notice that the group workouts, which are populating from our group calendar into your individual calendars, those often don't match the duration exactly, because we end up running a little more warm-up or dicking around here or there. So these ones I'll often, if I remember, click on and go in and change the planned duration just to give them a green box, but this is something you can do as well. So in this case, if I enter 100, TrainingPeaks will see that as 100 minutes, and Martin completed 98. So I save that, and now he's got a green box on that day. Cool. The other thing you may or may not have realized is that when you're looking ahead to planned weeks in this calendar, you can go ahead and drag elements around in the week on your own. So to look at Martin's week next week, if he decided to take a day off on Thursday and run 2 tune-up workouts in a row, he could just go into his own calendar and move those around like that. I'll move them back for now. The other thing he could do, I'm going to move them again. The other thing he could do, which you've all figured out, is use this post-activity comments box as a way to communicate with me. So Martin could have made this swap and just say, swap days, 'cause I'm lazy. Oops. And then when he enters that, he's going to get a comment from me. But if he were to enter that into this post-activity comments, I would get an alert saying Martin has left a comment on a workout. And then I can respond if it was something that was a question for me or something relevant. In this case, that's actually an unuseful comment for him to leave, but maybe a comment like, I'm thinking of swapping these days. Does this going to impact my race negatively? That would be a useful thing that I would want to get alerted to, and then I can respond to that. This pre-activity comments box in each workout looks like it would work in that way and be just as helpful. But this one is problematic because for some reason TrainingPeaks doesn't have alerts associated with this box. So anything I put in here for you at the last minute, or you put in here to talk to me about the workout, there's a chance neither of us will see that because there's no alert that comes from that. So I find this box fairly useless as a way to communicate, but this post-activity comments is a great way to chat pre or post-activity about any details related to that workout. The other thing I'll point out while I'm on this screen, the calendar screen, is that you'll see over on the right-hand side, let's go back a week, that's complete. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see your weekly summaries in terms of your training time, run distance, and the like. One of the important, or maybe the most important elements on this side panel are the total training stress of the week. And you'll see where that training stress gets used in your dashboard graph later. I'll come back to that, but that's an important metric to look at that we can keep an eye on during the week. This training stress is calculated based on the individual training stresses of each of these workouts during the week. And then the other row of numbers on the top here that can be a little confusing are also a summary that's related to your dashboard performance management chart, which we'll look at. But for now, I'll just say that these three numbers are giving an idea of the balance of your current versus your historic training and some snapshot of where your form or your freshness might be. So here we've got your chronic training load. Here we've got your training load this week, or your acute training load, and then some numerical expression of how tired you're likely going to be as a result of that training week. Does that make sense? So theoretically, if you've been doing this much training chronically, and then Martin did a little more than he's been used to this week, then his form is going to be a negative number during that week. So this is something you can keep an eye on, but it's also one of the main things I'm watching as we go through a training program is where this form number is and how it fluctuates during the cycles. And we can look at any one of your performance management charts individually once I scan through this for you, and you can get an idea of how we use this. Typically on the 4-week training cycle, we generally stick with. You'll see this be a negative number for 3 weeks of that cycle as you're building your mileage. And then ideally this number will come back into the positives when you have a recovery week, which indicates you've done less than you've been doing typically, and therefore you're back in balance or you've freshened up nicely. Just one sec, I'm going to take away Penny's bells. I'm sorry about the sound there. Hold on. I can't hear or see anybody, but is that, that's all good? Okay, cool. That's all pretty straightforward. I think I apologize for going over something so simple, but that's the basics of that. And then within each session that's been planned in the calendar. One of the things I do, and one of the things I would encourage you to do, is do a quick analysis once your workout's finished. So can I open up your workout today, Martin? Can we look at details on this one? Okay. So again, clicking on a workout opens it. You've got some summary data, which is obvious and not that interesting. But if you click on the Analyze button for yourself, now you'll get into more of the meat of each of the workouts, and it becomes a little more interesting. So this is something I'll typically do on anything except for a recovery run on your behalf. But I think it's also super useful to kind of get yourself familiar with how your data is looking and how things are going. So in this case, Martin had two 25-minute chunks at aerobic threshold. So this shows heart rate, pace, and cadence. The gray is elevation. So you can see as I roll over the graph, just even roughly, you can eyeball, I'll click and drag. You can eyeball where his first aerobic threshold chunk was probably, and roughly probably where his second one was. And if we scroll down a little further, you'll see some more graphs. This is one I'll often use, showing the heart rate distribution during that workout. We can roll over these and see the range. So Martin's zone 1 is 0 to 145 beats per minute. Well, ideally not quite 0, but zone 2, you'll see his aerobic threshold would be at the top of zone 2, so around 153, give or take. So we would expect on an aerobic threshold run like this, where he's trying to stay right around 153, he's going to have a little bit of time where he's exceeded that slightly, and then times where he's going to correct back below that. But on average, we'd like to see, and you'd like to see for yourself, an aerobic threshold segment at around a heart rate of 153, let's say, for Martin. And similarly, there's a pace distribution you can look at. On the right-hand side, one of the reasons I've encouraged some of you to start manually lapping your watches instead of having it on kilometer laps is that this is a really easy way. You can see Martin did a good job lapping his sections here. It's an easy way to look at the data from a segment. So I can click on Martin's first aerobic threshold, and it gives me this summary here, 153, which is exactly his target number. And it gives me a pace to glance at. So we know at aerobic threshold right now, Martin was running 353 on that first segment. And his second segment, he cheated just a tiny bit and he got down to 350. So we would call this an amazingly good aerobic threshold run in terms of execution. Yeah, well done, Martin. Phew. Were you sweating? It's fantastic. Yes. Yes. Yeah, you're excited to get home and you're feeling good. I know. And then we can click back on entire workout here, and now it's back to showing us the stats here for the entire workout. These are all obvious. I won't explain those. There's some mystery numbers in here, maybe. Here's the training stress score of that workout for Martin. And you remember that's going into those chronic training load, acute training load, and freshness expressions within TrainingPeaks. Just to give you a ballpark of what this means, a training stress score of 100, theoretically, is 60 minutes at threshold, at not aerobic threshold, at anaerobic threshold, so the top of zone 4. So here Martin collected 100 training stress points in almost 80 minutes. So that all makes sense. That reflects that this was quite a bit easier than half marathon pace on average, which is where the threshold would be. So that's where these numbers come from. It's a product of how intense your workout was and the duration. So there's a lot of different ways to get to this TSS number. NGP is a normalized graded pace, meaning it's correcting for changes in elevation as best it can. So you'll see Martin's average pace was 408, and he got a little bonus. So it said if it was a flat course, he'd be on 405. IF is intensity factor relative to his anaerobic threshold. So this is 0.8, meaning it's pretty easy. And this efficiency factor is something TrainingPeaks doesn't use, but I use on the larger time scales, as in 6 months to a year, to see if your efficiency is improving as you're going through your training. This EF is basically pace over heart rate, meaning as you get fitter, if you're reading heart rate with your chest strap, as you get fitter, your heart rate at any pace should get lower. That's one of the training changes we're looking for. And what that means is if your heart rate gets lower, your pace is the same, this number's going to go up. Or on the flip side, something that's relevant to Martin, for example, as a marathoner, we know what heart rate he's probably going to run the marathon at. So we would be looking for speed to increase at any heart rate, particularly at the marathon heart rate. And that would also make this number go up. Yep, for sure. Yeah, this is looking at the normalized graded pace here. Yeah, so I'll mention elevation before I leave this screen. Don't let me forget that. But yeah, this will take that into account. This gets buggered up by surface, meaning if you look at your EF out on a trail run, particularly a hilly one where the elevation isn't going to read perfectly, the distance isn't going to read perfectly, this number won't be helpful. You'll also notice as you go through the year that things like heat, illness, wind, being overtired or stressed, all of those things will reduce your EF number as you go. So it's not just as simple as watching this week by week and knowing your training's working, but on a large scale, this is a real important number, and it's one of the real values of having that heart rate data to feed into that. Rest is all obvious. On a follow-up to your point, Luke, one of the problems or limitations is that few of our watches give very good elevation data. Martin's old Polar M400 used to give perfect data, but this one looks a little garbagey. So if you're a data geek, and I sometimes do this, but I often forget, you can go ahead and correct your elevation. So when you're on this screen, you can click this button, and it uses the map, the actual map, to figure out what the true elevation was more likely to be. So here I clicked on that, and you'll see Martin's watch said he had an elevation gain and loss of 300 meters. And actually it's 50, which is a better number. And I click apply and close. And then if I save that, you'll see it cheated him of some EF because he was getting credit for running up and down 300 meters, which he actually didn't do. Any questions? That's sort of in a nutshell what you can look at in this summary section on each workout. Cool. Good point. That's a good point. Right. That's a good point. Yep. Cool. All right. I'm going to kill out of here. Are you ready for something a little more detailed? Elise, thumbs up? Okay. Let's look at your dashboard. So all of that, really, this is just the calendar functionality. That is what it looks like is really happening. But the most important value for me, and therefore potentially to you, is back here in this dashboard section. I've set these up with what I see as valuable information. And unfortunately, as a coach, I can only set this up once. And it applies to everybody. So you'll notice even on your own dashboard, we can scroll down in Martin's and he starts to have charts showing his biking performance and his swim performance. Anyways, you can just ignore all of that. That's because I have some triathletes. But all the running stuff is right up here at the front. Some of these are very obvious. You can scan through them for yourself. These two charts are interesting and useful to look at for yourself, especially as you've modified your training and you want to look ahead a year from now, let's say, and see where your training intensity distribution is. So in Martin's case, he's had a good setup for a while. We can look at his time in zone 1 is 65% and 17% in zone 2. So he's around 82%, 83% of his time in zones 1 and 2, and very little up in the high intensity zones. And then similarly, his heart rate follows that same pattern. So one of the things I've done when we've looked back at your past training, if you had heart rate data or even if you only had speed data, is to see where that intensity distribution was and figure out how we can shift that towards something more productive. I will show you an unproductive one. Close your eyes. You won't know who this is. Let me see. Other. Actually, nobody knows this guy. Here's what an unproductive one looks like. I typically see it as a big middle finger. Yeah, you can have a look at your own. And typically when I see someone cheating all their workouts and trying to get up to higher speeds by forcing it, they'll end up distributing something much more into zone 3 when they're supposed to be in zone 2, and zone 2 when they're supposed to be in zone 1, and they miss out on the most valuable training down here. So I keep an eye on those. And then these are just a quick visual of where your intensity has come from during the week and how that's changed week to week. But this is the meat of what I wanted to show you. This performance management chart is useful for looking back and for projecting forward as well. And what this chart is doing is taking every single workout that you've done and looking at the intensity and the training stress score for each of those workouts, and then plotting them all on this graph to give some idea about what the flow has been like of training stress and freshness as you've gone through your season. So this is an entire year of Martin's data. Each workout is represented by 2 dots. So there's a lot of dots on here. And I can roll over any dot and it'll give me a quick summary of what that workout was. So the red dot is the total training stress of that workout. And the blue dot is just the intensity of the workout. So we can do a quick scan and see here's a real outlier for Martin in terms of overall training stress. And if I roll on that Sunday, the 28th of April, I can click on it once and see it was the Eugene Marathon. So that makes sense. That was the most stressful single day. Well, I lied. One more. Here's RVM. Slightly more training stress because it was run a slightly quicker pace. But that just shows you that each workout has got 2 dots and you can go ahead and scan. I can also potentially look for high points in terms of intensity quickly and kind of do a little scan through what those might have been. Not sure where your races are and why they're not up there, but figure that out later. And each of those, so the training stress score from each workout gets averaged over a week to make this pink line. That's called the acute training load. And again, TrainingPeaks is averaging that over 1 week. And then it's looking at 6 weeks of that data from every single workout and plotting this blue curve, which it's calls the CTL here, the chronic training load. The theory behind this chart is that the chronic training load, that 6-week moving average, is roughly representative of your fitness. And the pink line, the weekly or acute training load, just shows how much stress you've been under in the previous week. And then, as I mentioned on the workout screen, if your acute training load is higher than what you've been used to, your chronic load, you're going to be below 0 for freshness or form. Does that make sense? So we can glance through Martin's chronic training load progression here, and we can see here's a period from the 20th of January to the 25th of February where his acute training load was higher than his chronic load, and therefore he was below 0 down here for form. And then luckily, or maybe through decent planning, he had his recovery cycle start at that 3 or 4 week mark, and then he freshened up here back above baseline on his yellow line or his form. You can see he was at 17, and that freshening allowed him to have another build of weekly training load above what he'd been used to. And then you'll notice that 3 weeks on, recovery, weeks on, recovery, weeks on, that fluctuation gradually builds the chronic training load as well. And then in a perfect world, and this will be the same for each of your A races, in a perfect world, you'll do what Martin's done here. You'll be able to build that fitness up until your taper period before your key race. And then as you drop off training volume during the taper, you'll get a nice big boost in form or in freshness going into the race. So this is quite textbook. And then following through, we can talk more about Martin's season, but that gives you, this chunk here gives you a pretty good idea of what we're looking at and how we're using this to figure out when recovery's due. You can use this to figure out when you're stressing yourself too much and your form has gotten too low. That might be time for an emergency recovery block. The other thing, and I know I've mentioned at least to one of you recently that I was getting concerned because your training stress balance was getting very negative. That comment kind of comes from me glancing either at this chart or at the right-hand side of your calendar and realizing that once you're down in this minus 20 range, for most runners, that's pretty much time for intervention and recovery. And what can happen, one of the nice things that TrainingPeaks helps avoid is the accumulated stress from a lot of different activities, because you can build stress in a deceptive way that doesn't feel like training stress. For example, if we added a lot of walking into Martin's program, or a lot of cycling, or a lot of extra weight workouts or something, all of that is training stress that TrainingPeaks will look at as part of that TSS and take that into consideration when it's figuring out your form and freshness. Does that make sense? at a glance as well, like we've got a whole year here of Martin. I'll mention two more things. One is I can quickly scan and see where he's at right now versus a year ago. So right now he's at a fitness of 65. 1 year ago exactly, he was at a fitness of 71. So one might be concerned, although I'm not, for various reasons that are personal to what Martin's figured out about his training. But ideally, over the period of a career, we're looking at Martin after 10 years of building. But over the period of a career, there will be ups and downs like this throughout a year, throughout a larger multi-year cycle. But over time, the progression of chronic training load should be upwards until you reach a sustainable level for yourself. And then this will look a lot more like Martin's, fairly sideways with ups and downs during the year and well-timed builds associated with key races. Comments? Questions? That was a lot, I apologize, but yeah, it's a bit of a mess until you realize yeah. And I think you, Leon, were one I was thinking of who had a lot of different sources of training stress during a couple of weeks. And yeah, it ended up, with surprising drops in your overall form. So it's just something to keep in mind too, that I think this helps bring to front of mind, is that all that training stress is additive as well. Can I pull yours up, Leon? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Martin. I won't pull up your PMC, but I had something else to mention. Go ahead, Martin. Sorry. Yeah, th- absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And depending on how you attained that 65, you're going to be in much different fitness. So if you were the guy with the big middle finger who got to 65 and was hoping to run a good marathon, you're going to crash and burn and die. I guarantee it, right? But if you've got there with the training appropriate to your chosen distance, it's going to be much different. But that's a good point, Martin. The other thing you've noticed with yourself, and I've definitely noticed with people who've been training a lot longer, is that particularly for the longer events, there is a accumulated lifetime mileage that's really, really valuable that doesn't show up in here at all. You're just looking at a 6-week average and how that changes over time. And I do feel bad that some people have ended up quite obsessed about this number and feel like it predicts their performance exactly, but it doesn't. It's just helping us get this balance of training stress and recovery, and over the long term trying to give some sense of how that changes. So to use Martin's example right here was his better of these two marathons. On marathon day, he was at a fitness of 66, and on this marathon, a fitness of 83. So if you were to get too in your head about exactly what that number is, that's going to be very stressful. But it's really just a training tool and an expression in a general way of where you're at. Yeah, thanks, Martin. That's really helpful to bring up. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah. And that's one reason I've been on TrainingPeaks for many years to use that number, and they don't. And the more frustrating thing is when someone starts using a watch that pretends to measure power, which none of them actually do, it buggers up that number, and then I have to calculate it all manually. So it's even worse. But that's another rant for another time. One thing I wanted to actually I'll stay here for a second, see if there's other thoughts or comments. My question for you, my point for you, Leon, was something unrelated to this chart. So, does it really? I won't look at your chart then. No, there's no good. There's no good or bad. It's more just a question of yeah, yeah. When I say no good or bad, that's not true. I'll make one quick point. One of the bad things about Martin's chart that actually turned out good in the end is how steep this build was. So this is something I've looked at on some of yours. Someone who's been injured frequently, I could look back, and one of the things I'm really concerned about is looking at how steep these builds are and whether that led to injury. So in Martin's case, you can see here he dropped below zero here, the 28th of August, and stayed there for 6 weeks, basically. So that's risky. He was at minus 29 or minus 30, 6 weeks in the negatives, where usually, ideally, we'd like to see about 3, maybe 4 in some rare cases. And as a result, this was a very steep attempted increase in chronic training load. In this case, there was no choice because this was coming up and it was worth a shot. And again, on the far left, there are many, many years of this. So this was a calculated risk that totally paid off. But in your case, Elise, for example, one thing you can look at for yourself, and I've gone back and looked at, is check out times where maybe you've ended up with a niggle or an injury. And I pretty much will bet you money that there was something like this leading into those in each case. Oh, right, right. It starts to make sense. Okay, yeah. Okay. And I'm not calling you out, but just saying I think there's some of this in your chart that's useful to see too. Even in September, I think you had an 8-week chunk like this, perhaps. But so, anyways, that's useful for all of you to keep an eye on. And actually, you know what? Or don't. Half the people I work with probably never have looked at this after we've had this talk, and that also works because I have to do something to earn my money. So the final thing, sorry, any other questions or comments on that? That was the main thing I wanted to show you. So yeah. If you can record, yeah, drills, no, because it's going to be negligible, right? It's going to be as a percentage of your total, it's going to be nothing basically. Strides are a bit of training stress that decide whether you're going to keep him in there or not, and just do it consistently, and then it'll keep everything the same. That's a good question though. Let's just answer that. I'm just going to look at that quickly. I've never looked at this. The training stress of some strides. Yeah, I think it's probably better just to shut it off for those interruptions and just capture the meat of the data and always do that. Um, Yeah, and I thought it was gonna. I scanned that workout. I thought it could give me a TSS of just those few minutes, but it doesn't seem to have that. The brains to do that. So, one thing I wanted to show you that relates to actually all of you at some point. Let me. Where's Leon? Let me use Leon here for a second. I'm gonna see. Do you have a trail run in here somewhere, Leon? Let's go back to that week. Oh yeah, let's look at yours then, Elise. Elise, this one? No, I'm back too far. This one? Oh yeah. Okay, actually, you're not the best example because this is the heart rate's a bit gobbledy. But let's just say, um, one of the ways this falls apart is trail running typically. And trail running normally, even trail hiking, will really underestimate the training stress of a run, because the pace is so low. I think you're multiplying by a really small intensity factor. So one of the things I do, and you can help me do, is calculate the training stress score of trail running using heart rate instead of pace. And the way you do that is on this summary screen. Let me back up. One click here, you're on the summary screen. Here, where training stress is calculated, right now it's set at run or run pace to calculate the stress. I can change it here to look at it by heart rate. And I know I don't want that to be the default. And now it gives me a score of 70 for that. So if Elise had a strap on that day for heart rate, I would keep that, but I'll cancel it for now. So that's something, again, if you're keeping track on your own and trying to get your data as clean and sensible as possible, and you're recording, and you're recording heart rate, you can adjust your trail runs for me right there, and that's actually super helpful. The other thing you could do with the trail run is just change it to another, oh no, it's still using, never mind. Erase that. Yes, if you're doing epic trail runs, record your heart rate and then multiply it by heart rate to get your TSS there. Was there other random things like that came up as I went through? Yep. Yes. It's a very good question, and I can't answer it, but I'll tell you why I can't answer it. I can't answer it because I don't program by TSS typically. So your planned TSS is 215 here, but that's garbage because if you look here, this one has got no planned TSS, no planned TSS, no planned TSS. So ignore the planned TSS. But to answer your question, yes, that's a fantastic way that you'll be able to swap things out once you get a sense of what's what. So you'll learn for yourself, for example, that let's just roll back. A 2 hour long run gives you about 180, and you'll be able to look. Here's an hour cycling. easy cycling is 30, right? Or you know what I mean? You'll get a pretty good sense for yourself. And in your case, it'll become more relevant with the long trail activities too, that you'll have to have you don't have to guess at the conversion factor. Uh, you a little bit, but you'll have a lot of data of your own to use to guess at that. So, and again, if you correct trail running by heart rate, you'll see that you may be accumulating a lot more training stress than you think you are. Similar to some of the 300-watt bike rides you were doing. Yeah, when those get way up there, you'll see you add up points pretty fast when you're strong on the bike too. So, good question. Other things? Is Anton hungry? Is that the problem there? Sorry, Anton. I mean, suck it, Anton. Yeah, say no. You can get it ready. I'll be done in 5 minutes. Thank you. Cool. Oh, one more random point. This one came up with Elise today, I think. Um, I sometimes go like this and leave a note for you, or you may do that for me. And let's stop doing that because I realize that's another piece of functionality that doesn't come with any alerts. So, yeah, they totally should. So you may have noticed that I just saw one in Leon's here. I default to using this day off um, as a way to communicate because it's got a post activity comments box, so I could just like whatever thoughts on next week and then leave you something there, and you're going to get an alert for that, and then when you respond I'll get one as well. So that's better than those notes boxes. Notes to yourself, those are fine, but it's not a good way to communicate. And I think Elise, when we scanned Elise's, that was a good example. You saw Elise had a lot of notes to self in there as well. I think it's really important to look at this as sort of a diary and a place to get all your own thoughts and reflections on your training down as well. And even if you leave TrainingPeaks, you can export all of your data as a big Excel sheet, and all of the comments will stay linked with every one of the workouts. You'll kind of have everything all together and all linked, which is super helpful. Final random point. Let's go back to Martin's here for a second. Final random point, and I think you may have found this, is to check your zones. Laura can't be here tonight, but she asked me about this. So this is for her benefit. If you're on your calendar and you can't remember what your zone 2 is, or you have tempo run on Tuesday and you can't remember what zone 4 is, just go and click on the cog wheel and go down to zones. And then you'll be able to find your own heart rate zones, where's your pace zone, for example, run pace zone, etc. So, final random point. Oh, go ahead. Yes. Yep. Always heart rate if you can. That's a great question. And the reason I say that, let me see if I can explain this clearly. There are a lot of things that affect pace that can cause you to over or underrun, particularly overrun workouts. So hills, heat, altitude, fatigue, impending illness, life stress, poor sleep, all of these things mean that you probably should be running a bit slower on those days. And if you aim for pace, you end up overrunning for your own personal condition or for the circumstances on that day. But one of the things heart rate does for you is it automatically helps you adjust the workout level to your own physiology under any circumstance. So if you're nearly sick, you didn't get any sleep, you're at altitude and it's 30 degrees Celsius, your heart rate will force you to slow down. Does that make sense? So it's actually, it's quite a helpful way to help auto adjust. The other thing your heart rate will do for you, Leon, is if training's working, as I mentioned when we looked at the EF, you're going to get faster and faster at given heart rates as your training's working. But I don't update that pace table often or without good reason. So what you'll see as you're getting fitter in your own data, even on specific workouts, should be over time that you're in the right heart rate zones, but your pace zones start creeping up. So you might be at aerobic threshold, but you'll look at your data and you'll see you were running in pace zone 3. That's a good thing, and that's a training adaptation. And by using heart rate, you've been able to run in the ideal zone for training the whole time, regardless of what that pace was as your fitness has been changing. Does that make sense? Whereas if you were aiming for aerobic threshold pace, you would have stayed stuck there for a while until you made the next leap and we upgraded your paces, basically. Whew. I don't know. Did I explain that? Ish? Okay. Yeah. So it's got some functionality that's helpful. Yeah. Anything else? You good, Luke? Okay. Cool. Thanks. This is not intended to be a don't ask me any more questions meeting. It was mainly just to make sure you got all that basic, and then we'll deal with details at any point. So, cool. All right. Thanks. All right. See you later. Bye.